There have been many prestigious car brands, and nearly all of them made a point of distancing themselves from mass market and utilitarian vehicles. After all, seeing one of their cars working as a taxi or a delivery vehicle could seriously damage the brand's status in the eyes of its customers. Mercedes took a different path. Its cars could carry government officials and wealthy owners, serve as family vehicles, spend years working as taxis, or endure heavy commercial use every day. A Mercedes could symbolize success or simply perform hard daily work. But in any of these roles, it remained a Mercedes, expensive, respectable, and almost indestructible, with one of the strongest reputations in the automotive world. This rare combination of prestige and utility became one of the defining qualities of the brand. And the first models to embody this formula on a full scale were the heroes of our story, the Mercedes-Benz W114 and W115. Before the arrival of the W114 and W115, Mercedes itself belonged to the group of manufacturers that did not want their prestigious models to be associated with mass-market cars. In the early 1960s, the core of its midsize range was the W110, a four-cylinder relative of the more expensive six-cylinder W111 and W112. To reduce costs, cars from different classes shared many components and used almost identical bodies. For buyers of the lower models, this was an advantage. Even a relatively simple diesel Mercedes offered a spacious interior and looked very similar to the brand's far more expensive cars. But this level of standardization also had a downside. The four-cylinder models were noticeably larger than their predecessors, and their engines often struggled with the extra weight. Owners of the more expensive and prestigious Mercedes models also wondered why their status-conscious sedan looked so much like a cheaper diesel from the class below. Mercedes apparently realized that this arrangement could eventually work against the company. So in 1965, it began moving away from the system by introducing the new W108 and W109 families for the upper class. However, the mid-size W110, together with the last six-cylinder sedan from the old W111 family, remained in production until early 1968. By then, the distinctive tail fins already belonged to a fading design trend. Mercedes needed a new mid-size family, not a copy of its flagship models, but a car with a clear identity and a place of its own within the range. Development of the new generation began in 1961. Fritz Nallinger, head of development at Daimler-Benz, argued from the beginning for a clearer distinction between the new model and the company's upper-class cars. This meant finally abandoning the standardized body concept previously used by the Ponton and Fintail families. The brief called for a car that would be more compact than the W110, while offering the same amount of interior space. New chassis solutions were also expected to improve the car's road manners. At an early stage, the decision was made to expand the engine range to include six-cylinder units. The car was designed from the beginning to accommodate a wide range of powertrains. The same family would include economical four-cylinder diesels, conventional gasoline versions, and more powerful six-cylinder engines. At the same time, the base models were not turned into stripped-down cars from a lower category. Regardless of the engine, they received the same body, the new rear suspension, and disc brakes on all four wheels. Safety was not reserved for the expensive versions either. Before launch, the design was tested in 26 crash tests. In January 1968, Mercedes-Benz presented the new mid-size family to the automotive press. Inside the company, it was called the New Generation, emphasizing that this was not simply a replacement for the W110, but the beginning of a new chapter in the development of Mercedes mid-size cars. Soon afterward, the models were shown to the public at Europe's major motor shows. At launch, the family included six sedans: the four-cylinder gasoline 200 and 220, the diesel 200D and 220D, and the six-cylinder 230 and 250. Mercedes entered the market with a complete range producing from 55 to 130 horsepower. The official press kit included not only technical specifications, drawings, and a description of the model range, but also a separate section titled The New Taxi. From the beginning, Mercedes made no attempt to hide the car's working role and did not treat the taxi version as something incompatible with the overall presentation of the brand. It appeared alongside the regular sedans as a full member of the family. Both the press and buyers received the new family well, to put it mildly. Demand quickly exceeded the company's production capacity, and customers often had to wait for months for their cars. The diesel versions were especially popular, above all the 220D. They were not fast even by the standards of the late 1960s. The 200D needed around 31 seconds to reach 100 kilometers per hour. But private owners, taxi fleets, and various organizations bought them not for performance, but for moderate fuel consumption, durability, and high resale value. The more prestigious versions also sold well. Overall, the new generation proved to be a car with no obvious weak points. It was expensive, and the base models were undeniably slow, but buyers found few serious flaws in the design itself. A wide range of engines and trim levels was not enough to make the car unique. Nearly every manufacturer offered something similar. What made Mercedes different was something else. Its prestige was not built on rarity and exclusivity like Ferrari or Rolls-Royce. It was built on the promise of engineering superiority over ordinary cars. A Mercedes was expected to be stronger, safer, more durable, and better suited to real-world use. That is why utilitarian versions did not undermine the brand's status. They confirmed it and made it stronger. The 200D was slow and could be modestly equipped, but it was not a car deliberately cheapened to the level of a budget brand. The buyer was not paying for power or luxury equipment, but for durability, comfort, safety, and build quality. That is why a basic Mercedes was seen not as a cheap car, but as an expensive professional tool. Previous generations had already shown that durability and reliability were part of the Mercedes identity, so the new model did not have to build that reputation from scratch. Durability alone was not enough to preserve the prestige of the new family. The W114 and W115 also had another side. At launch, the six-cylinder 250 already occupied the top of the range. In November 1968, Mercedes introduced the 250C and 250CE, the first coupes in the brand's midsize line. Technically, they were closely related to the 250 sedan. From the front bumper to the windshield, the coupe was almost identical to the four-door model. But beyond that point, the differences became obvious. It had a lower roof, a more steeply raked windshield, two doors, no central pillar, and fully retractable frameless side windows. The 250C used a 130 horsepower carbureted engine, while the 250CE received a 150 horsepower engine with Bosch D-Jetronic electronic fuel injection. It was the first production Mercedes passenger car to use this system. The 250CE cost 17,704 marks. That was almost 50% more than the base diesel sedan, and around 550 marks more than the large Mercedes 280S W108 from the upper-class range. This was a genuinely expensive coupe, priced at the level of the brand's larger prestige models. Something was still missing from this formula. Imagine the owner of an expensive coupe speeding down the road with a blonde woman in the passenger seat, or simply the buyer of a sedan in the highest trim level. If he saw an almost identical Mercedes working as a taxi and carrying someone home from the train station, he would probably not be thrilled. The coupe may not be the best example. It looked noticeably different from the sedan and remained genuinely rare. Around 67,000 were built, roughly 3.5% of total family production. The situation was more complicated for buyers of expensive sedans. After paying a great deal of money, a customer naturally expected at least some sense of exclusivity. He certainly did not want his car to be mistaken for a taxi or a service vehicle. The answer was that Mercedes' prestige did not depend on the W114 and W115 alone. The company also sold the upper-class W108 and W109, the SL Roadster, and the Mercedes 600, a car far beyond the reach of most buyers. These models kept the brand at the top of the automotive hierarchy. That status flowed downward through the range. A customer might buy an expensive midsize sedan, but he also received part of the prestige of a company that built cars for heads of state and the world's most powerful businessmen. The existence of a diesel taxi did not cancel out the Mercedes 600. Even that was not enough. The position of the brand could give the car status, but it did not explain why similar Mercedes taxis did not irritate owners of the expensive versions. This brings us back to where we started, the reliability of Mercedes in general and the W114 and W115 in particular. Countless otherwise decent cars have been ruined by poor build quality and constant breakdowns. No one wants to pay a large amount of money and then stand by the roadside with the hood open, staring hopelessly at the engine. Any sense of prestige disappears very quickly in that situation. Mercedes taxis had enormous durability and regularly covered hundreds of thousands of kilometers. A similar taxi did not necessarily devalue the more expensive sedan. Instead, it showed that the high price paid for more than an emblem and better trim. It also paid for engineering that could endure years of hard use. These two factors completed the formula. The upper Mercedes models gave the brand its high status, while the working versions proved that this status was based on more than appearance. A taxi with a three-pointed star on its hood did not destroy Mercedes' prestige. It became another demonstration of the brand's quality. One of the most famous cars from the family was a Greek Mercedes 240D with a 65 horsepower diesel engine. Taxi driver Grigorios Sachinidis used it for many years, and by 2004, the car had covered an incredible 4.6 million kilometers. Production of the W114 and W115 ended in December 1976. By then, Mercedes had built 1,919,000 vehicles from the family. That included more than 1.8 million standard sedans, around 67,000 coupes, almost 10,000 long wheelbase cars, and several thousand chassis for special bodies. The new W123 generation had already been introduced in January 1976. So the two families were produced side by side for almost the entire year. The final W114 and W115 left the assembly line on December 14th, clearing the way for their successor. The W123 no longer had to find its place in the market. The W114 and W115 had already created it, not only for their immediate successor, but for many later generations of Mercedes.